Welcome to Near and Rupar, our weekly live stream. I am David Neer, publisher of The Down Ballot. My co-host, Aaron Rupar, is publisher of Public Notice. And each week we discuss all of the top stories making news from the very top of the ballot all the way on down. If you are a paid subscriber to either of our publications, The Down Ballot or Public Notice, you can participate in our Q&A. Just drop a comment and we will try to get to your question as soon as we can. We love your questions, so please keep them coming. As folks saw from the title of this week's episode, we wanted to drill down into the unbelievable nonsense, self-defeating nonsense that is spewing from Donald Trump's mouth on the topic of affordability. Affordability has been the number one message from Democrats running in campaigns across the country. We saw it from Zohran Mamdani in New York City. We saw it from Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. Very different candidates, very different electorates, very similar message. And it should be no surprise because in 2024, the key reason for Trump's success was voters' unhappiness at skyrocketing prices and what it meant for the cost of living and trying to have a stable life where the good things are in reach and are affordable. And Trump, of course, made all of these absurd promises about how he was going to lower grocery prices on day one and restore folks to level of prices and affordability that they were previously used to. And of course, he hasn't. In fact, things have only gotten much, much worse, and he has helped make it worse. And now that Democrats have drawn a lot of blood by pressing affordability, by giving Trump a taste of his own medicine, Trump has completely spiraled out. And Aaron, this is where you come in because you have documented Trump's reaction to the concept of affordability very closely, and it's really something to behold.
Yeah, it really is, because I think it's one of the clearest examples of an instance where his advisors are clearly telling him one thing, but he can't really stick to the script. And, clearly the people who are in his ear, his political people, are telling him that affordability is a big issue. I think there was Fox News polling just this week that showed that and the economy, which are obviously related, but were kind of presented as two different things in their polling, are still by far and away the top issue for voters. And despite that, then there were even some claims earlier this year. I've seen these posts re-up that Trump posted about, being the affordability president and bringing prices down. So it wasn't just the campaign. This kind of bled into January and February. And then, of course, after we had the Liberation Day tariffs, the messaging had to change a little bit because, of course, tariffs, are going to cause prices to increase because you're increasing the prices of imports. So we've had a number of instances this week where, Trump now is back to calling affordability a hoax, which he did repeatedly during White House events this week. And, I saw some of the Democratic campaign accounts picking this up, and other people kind of commenting that Trump on a daily basis is cutting ads for Democrats that they can use, next year and beyond. So, I think the key thing to understand with Trump on this issue is that, the guy hasn't had to pay for anything in decades at this point. Obviously lives a very insulated life. He's not going to the store. Of course, he infamously thought that you need to present ID to buy groceries.
Oh, right.
There's so many little tidbits he's dropped over the months and years that indicate that, as you would expect, given that he's a president, was a, major celebrity before then, you don't think he's cooking or going to the grocery store or pumping gas or driving or using transit or...
Could you imagine Trump cooking? Like, what would a Donald Trump produced meal look like? Oh, God.
Yeah, you'd probably hire like a McDonald's manager to come and cook for him at home or something if he was hosting. Which I guess he literally kind of did when infamously in 2019 when he had I think it was the Clemson football team at the White House and he had the burger buffet for them. But so when he says that it's a hoax, there are a couple different ways of interpreting that. I mean, either, maybe quite literally he thinks it's a hoax because he doesn't know how much things cost. And for him, it just doesn't really pierce his bubble of, his day-to-day life. And so maybe he does really think that it's, kind of a fake idea that, prices actually are increasing, even though, of course, they are for normal people who spend money as normal people do. But on the other hand, we've seen this many times with him politically where, some of his lies, I think he tries to kind of ingrained onto the public through sheer force of repetition. And this can work in some instances. I mean, I think back like on the Mueller investigation, and I remember there's some very amusing clips back then of Trump saying no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. Where this was kind of his talking point that it was a hoax, that he didn't collude with Russia. For something like that, that's kind of abstract for people. It doesn't really touch upon their day-to-day lives. I guess I can see how maybe just the repeating the lie over and over can be an effective technique. But I think with affordability and prices, it's a very different kind of puzzle there, because obviously people, they understand how much things cost every day. They're kind of living that, they're budgeting for their families or for themselves. And so I'm not sure that that's going to work. And, as you kind of alluded to in the intro, I mean, you can look at the various special elections that we had this year, the elections last month that were the off year ones, even the Tennessee election earlier this week, and all of these are kind of indicating that, affordability is a big issue and that it's working for Democrats because, of course, when Republicans control the whole federal government and people don't like the economy, I mean, like it or not, that's just kind of how the blame game works there. They're going to blame the party that's in power, and that's Republicans. So, I think it's kind of setting up for a very interesting 2026 because, as we come out of the holidays, we're going to be thrust into kind of a campaign environment. There's going to be, by the time we get to the summer, it's going to be kind of full-time campaigning going on. And really seems like Republicans don't really have an economic message at all, other than, it's Biden's fault or it's a hoax. But yet, there still kind of are these tidbits here and there. There was even one amusing one this week where Trump had a White House event and he was kind of getting agitated at the words that were in the teleprompter because it said something about like, I'm taking affordability seriously. Oh, but it's a term that Democrats use to attack Republicans, where you can kind of see the push and pull in his own mind where, I think he understands that he needs to pay lip service to affordability, but his heart really isn't into it. And so his instinct is to call it a hoax, to dismiss it. And if that's the best that Republicans can do, I think it's going to be a very rough year for them next year.
I feel like Trump uses the word hoax in a weird way. Like, I think of a hoax as, oh, I don't know, like Balloon Boy. Remember Balloon Boy? Like the kid who was supposedly sent aloft by like a bunch of balloons into the air. There was never a kid
I actually don't remember
inside.
that.
You don't?
No.
Chat, back me up on this one. Do we remember Balloon Boy? I hope there's some Balloon Boy fans here. But anyway, what I just like calling affordability a hoax. Like it's just such weird framing, and obviously Trump's mind, as I say often whenever we have these kinds of discussions, trying to get into Trump's mind always feels very gross.
Yeah.
But like like affordability, like it's really real. And as you said just at the end now, because Democrats use the word, he's like, it's a fake word. Okay, Valerie says, I remember Balloon Boy. Wendy, I remember.
Maybe.
Thank God. All right,
I'll have to Google this. Is it like a kids? Is it like a kids show?
No.
Oh,
Balloon
okay.
Boy. Some guy or family. Chat, you're gonna have to drop a link in here. Some guy or family claimed that they took a whole bunch of like giant ass balloons. Can't believe I'm talking about this, and like tied them to a box and sent this box flying in the air. And they claimed there was a kid inside the box. And everyone freaked out and lost their minds and were like, how do we get the balloons down? Anyway, there was no kid in the box. It was very dumb.
Yeah. Well, I want to kind of, on your point here, I think the context in which Trump means that affordability is a hoax is that to him, he thinks that it's a hoax that Democrats are perpetrating because they didn't care about affordability before he took office. Because his line is that we had this historic inflation under Joe Biden, and Democrats didn't really care about affordability then. Of course, maybe they should have cared more. It might have changed things last year, or at least kind of paid lip service to it. But now that he's in office, like that's all that they talk about. So I think when he says hoax, I don't think it's necessarily that he thinks that like the notion that people are struggling with prices is a hoax, but I think it's more kind of the way that Democrats are using it to be very, and I don't even know if that is my trying to get inside his head. I think that's what he means, is that it's like a hoax that Democrats are perpetrating because they don't sincerely care about it. They're just kind of pretending to hurt him. And I'm not even sure that makes sense, but I'm pretty sure that's what he is thinking.
Okay.
Since I've listened to him talk about this now for weeks and weeks on end. But again,
I think I regret asking.
Yeah. So anyway, but then you have Republicans who will go on TV and do interviews, and they clearly are uncomfortable with this sort of messaging. I mean, you can look at the clip from earlier this week where I believe the direct quote was like Trump said something that was like, affordability is a hoax perpetrated by Democrats. And he was surrounded at his desk by like Lisa McClain. And there are a number of Republican leaders who were around him. And you could see McClain in particular, you could see her kind of getting squeamish, like, oh my God, this is not the right thing to be saying politically about this. So, to me, it's just kind of a fascinating dynamic as we get more and more polls indicating that, the economy is, as it often is, the top issue for voters, but especially in this kind of inflationary environment that we've been living in now for, 3-4 years. But, it's still, inflation is still kind of around 3%, which is a little bit high. And, tariffs obviously are cutting against that. And, I think part of it, that has to be mentioned in this conversation as well, where, on the campaign trail, Trump talked a lot about affordability, trying to bring prices down on day one, as he put it. But then I think, kind of the rubber met the road pretty early on in his presidency, where I think he kind of faced a choice between pursuing tariffs or getting serious about affordability. And obviously he chose tariffs, which he seems obviously deeply committed to, kind of no matter what. And I think there might be on some level a recognition that, if he's going to have this tariffs regime, which is obviously quite punitive in a lot of instances where we have, 15-20% tariffs on imported items, then you can't really what can you really do about affordability in that sort of macroeconomic environment? And so you have guys like Bessent who are out there talking about no longer, necessarily bringing inflation down or lowering prices, but about trying to make wages increase to kind of keep up, with the rate of inflation and with prices going up. So, I've noticed that kind of subtle shift, at least among like Bessent and Lutnick and some of these guys who, have to get out there and kind of spin what the administration is doing, that they're no longer talking about bringing prices down or necessarily, even getting inflation down, but it's more about bringing wages up. So I think that's kind of part of the dynamic here too, is that Trump is so committed to tariffs that it almost, his policies are part of the problem here. And so instead of kind of addressing the actual policies, he has to find other ways to kind of spin this or to at least portray to voters that he's trying to do something about it.
I think it's worth disentangling inflation and affordability a little bit. And what we saw so vividly last year and really throughout Joe Biden's presidency was there's really not a ton that the president can do about inflation or really about price levels that people perceive to be too high. And you can't. The one thing a government can't pursue is deflation. To actually lower price levels. Governments have tried this in the distant past, and it's disastrous because it leads to a contraction of the economy. So people want to see lower prices, but it's really just not possible to achieve. And then you talk about increasing wages. Well, wages for most workers did increase at a rate higher than that of inflation during Biden's presidency, and that didn't satisfy anyone. And Paul Krugman has talked about this a lot. He's not the only one, which is that most people tend to view when they get raises, when they get salary increases, they tend to view that as something that they did for themselves, that they got that because they deserved it, because they worked hard. Whereas inflation is something that they blame either on the government or on more amorphous forces as attacking them personally. So, most people, I think, don't view it as like, oh, well, groceries are more expensive, but I'm earning more, so it's all okay. I think that if you try to make that argument, you really wind up rubbing people the wrong way. As for affordability in general, if you look at Mamdani's campaign, it's about so much more than just price levels of the groceries or gasoline. We're talking about making it possible to be able to afford childcare, healthcare, a home, and education. And that requires the kind of broad-based approach to legislating and to really rethinking the structure of our country that Republicans simply would never engage in, that is completely antithetical to anything that they believe in. And so Trump comes into office, and I think, Aaron, you talked about his choice of pursuing tariffs over affordability. But even if he had walked away from tariffs, I can't imagine there was really much that he could do to satisfy people. And he, of all people, should know that because Biden, he won because he hammered Biden over his inability to make any improvements on that front.
Yeah. And, I think the other kind of thing that's connected to this is, had Trump taken office and just kind of coasted, which is sort of what he did the first time around in the sense that, there were no like major macroeconomic disruptions in 2017 that I can recall. Of course, he was kind of paying lip service to tariffs. And he did increase tariffs in his first term, but nowhere near what he's done this
Yeah.
term. And you kind of wonder because now I don't know if you saw yesterday the ADP survey of private layoffs came out, which showed basically a contraction in the job market last month, which kind of renewed the expectation that there will be a rate cut. I think next week is when the Fed meets again. But, of course, cutting rates can lead to more inflation. So then that kind of compounds the affordability problem, even if markets like it. But, it's kind of introduced, we have sort of a stagflationary dynamic going on now where, it seems like the job market is pretty much stagnant, if not even like slightly contracting. Inflation is kind of sticky. And so, we might get a rate cut, which again, will kind of inject, probably boost the markets a little bit. But, how is that really going to play with, everyday Americans who aren't heavily invested in the stock market? So, I think that was a path that was open to Trump. And, but again, I think with the tariffs, and I haven't seen a lot of really detailed reporting on this, but it really strikes me that he views tariffs as being kind of like a slush fund for himself. Like it's a way of like wresting the power of the purse away from Congress, where he can kind of unilaterally impose these tariffs. And he talks about the billions, if not trillions of dollars that tariffs are bringing in, and I don't think those numbers have really been substantiated. But it does kind of strike me that there's a little bit of opaqueness about where is this money going, what's he using it for. Can he kind of unilaterally appropriate it? Obviously, Congress is supposed to be appropriating funds, but we're in kind of just like extra legal context at this point. So to me, I think that's part of why he's so committed to it is he views it as kind of this like personal slush fund that he can use
Yeah,
for
that
his
makes
own
sense.
purposes. And I'd be very curious, if investigative reporters kind of drill down on that to get more information about what's going on there, because it seems like it's been kind of in this gray area, and it's not totally clear to me. Like with, he claims that the ballroom is being entirely funded by private donors, but is he using some of the terrorist money for that? Or even this talk of like a rebate check next year, where's
Right.
that coming from? I've seen some informed speculation that even if they tried to cut a check to Americans based on tariffs, that the revenue wouldn't be sufficient. So then you'd maybe have to just put it on the national credit card. So as we get kind of deeper into this and the tariffs start to bite more and more, it kind of introduces this economic dilemma. And I think Trump has his own reasons for being heavily invested in tariffs, but I think that the macroeconomic effects are getting worse and worse.
And it's also very possible that the Supreme Court winds up bailing Trump out from his tariff mess. The Supreme Court has been obviously completely supine and utterly corrupt, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more with regard to the Texas redistricting ruling that just came out. But one of the few areas where the Supreme Court does seem to be ready to put the brakes on Trump is with tariffs. We don't know yet. We're awaiting a ruling. And of course, Trump would lose his mind and flip out, and who knows what the hell he'll say or do. But it is possible, it seems to me, that they could rescue him from the mess that he's created for himself.
Yes. Kevin Hassett just today was on TV saying that even if that's how it plays out, they have other emergency powers that they will invoke to reintroduce tariffs. And we've seen this with a lot of the illegal, or at least like extra legal actions that Trump has taken where, he's gotten kind of good at this, where even if the courts strike something down, he can kind of tweak it, do something very similar, and then it has to go all the way through the courts again. So I could very
Yeah,
much see a scenario where the courts say, okay, you're using these particular emergency powers for these tariffs. I think the law is called like IEPA that he's using, and you can't use that. So we're striking these tariffs down, but then he could invoke some other emergency authority or find a different way to impose tariffs. So, I mean, he seems extremely committed to it. And Hassett today was basically saying, we're going to win either way because either the court will, uphold these tariffs, or if they strike them down, we'll use other powers to reimpose similar tariffs. So I'm not necessarily, that's not going to be the end of it if that's how it
right.
plays out. And I didn't listen to the entirety of the argument. I know that the consensus coming out of the tariffs argument was that the government was poised to lose that. But I mean, maybe this is a good segue because, like, would anything really surprise you at the Supreme Court? Even though the argument didn't go well for Trump's lawyers, um, you know, it's already been like a month. Like, what they seem to be able to weigh in very quickly in some instances. Like, why is it taking so long? And in the meantime, I mean, this week we covered this in the newsletter just yesterday that Costco sued the administration to get the tariffs money back that they've already paid. the longer this goes, I mean, the more complications there are of that sort. Where like, they're going to have to refund all this money, millions, if not billions of dollars total. And that's going to be a huge mess. So there should be a little bit, you would hope the court would feel some urgency to weigh in here and kind of provide clarity. But we're a month out from arguments and there's still no word of when we can expect anything. And that could maybe be used. I mean, that would not be a legal argument whatsoever to kind of say it's too complicated to unwind these. But I think it was Coney Barrett during the argument kind of alluded to that, like it seems like a big mess. How would we, kind of unwind the tariffs regime? And so, nothing would surprise me on that front in terms of what the court would do.
And you make a really good point. Whenever the court wants to step in on a very expedited basis, it has no problem doing so. And when I say the court, I'm talking about the far right supermajority, the 6 ultra conservative justices, including the Chief Justice, who make up that supermajority. They can step in on their so-called shadow docket with very terse rulings that they don't even bother to sign and include almost no information and no explanation and no guidance for the lower courts. And they can just smack those courts down whenever they like, and no one can gainsay them. Or they can drag things out for as long as they like if they think it might be beneficial, or because who the hell knows? The conservatives are fighting amongst themselves about what they want to do in this situation. But I think you're right. That is a really good segue to talk about Texas. So just to bring folks up to speed, I am sure that everyone is aware that over the summer, Texas Republicans passed a brand new gerrymandered congressional map aimed at targeting 5 Democratic held seats. Opponents of that map immediately filed a lawsuit. In fact, they even filed a lawsuit before Governor Greg Abbott had signed the map into law because they knew they had to move as quickly as possible. And they challenged the map and they said, this map is a racial gerrymander, meaning that the map sorts voters into districts based on their race. And that is simply not allowed. The Constitution outright prohibits that. It has nothing to do with the Voting Rights Act, which, of course, is under separate threat. The Constitution says you just can't say, oh, black voter, you're going to go in this district, Hispanic voter, this district, white voter, that district. You're simply not allowed to do that. And the plaintiffs assembled a ton of evidence showing that's exactly what Texas Republicans had done. Texas Republicans claim, no, 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 we're doing it for partisan purposes, something the Supreme Court has allowed, and says you're allowed to sort voters based on their party affiliation or their likely political leaning. But what we know as partisan gerrymandering. But the plaintiffs had very compelling evidence saying, no, actually, what Texas Republicans were up to was sorting voters based on race. And a district court agreed with them. I should add, a very conservative Trump-appointed judge on a district court in Texas said, yeah, this is exactly what Texas almost certainly did. They likely committed a racial gerrymander, and they can't use that map, the new map in 2026. They have to go back to using the old map. And very predictably, the Supreme Court just this week issued a 2-page unsigned opinion saying, nope, district court got it all wrong. Very terse, almost no explanation. And it prompted a furious, furious dissent from the liberals, written by Elena Kagan, who said, this district court wrote a 160-page opinion, really got into the weeds, had a 9-day hearing, reviewed testimony from dozens of witnesses, thousands of pages of evidence, and really understood the nuances of this case. And Elena Kagan said that she was really, really harsh toward her colleagues. She said that her colleagues, basically lazily reviewed the district court's ruling over a holiday weekend before deciding to block it in a page and a half order. And what this really exposes is the Supreme Court's utter corruption. The only guiding principle here is, what do Republicans want to do? And that's simply what operated here, that Republicans want to target these 5 seats in Texas. And the Supreme Court said, yep, that sounds good to us. And they made up absurd bullshit reasons for why this judge got the case wrong in Texas. He didn't. I read the opinion. Yeah. It's an amazing opinion. I actually recommend reading it. It's a model of clarity, even for a dense subject like this. But it really shows what a fraud the Supreme Court is. And I hope it helps expose the corruption of the court to generate greater momentum for major, major reform.
Yeah, co-sign everything you just said, and I think it's kind of entering the zone of where some of the conversations surrounding the filibuster are, where it's almost becoming like it has to be part of what Democrats run on, not only next year, but especially in 2028, where we got to get rid of the filibuster and we got to expand the Supreme Court, or at least kind of reform it in some way, shape, or form, because yeah, it's just completely out of control. The notion that these rulings are kind of being made on the legal merits is completely out the window. It's basically
Yep.
whatever Republicans require of the majority, and it's great to have these dissents, which obviously for historical purposes will be kind of documents that live on and that people can refer to for at least seeing what the the dissenters had to say. Obviously, we're not getting much rationale from the actual majority, so
Right.
we're kind of left to infer, which is part of the frustration here. But it's becoming kind of like a bedrock requirement, I think, of Democrats going forward. To If we're going to kind of save this democracy, we have to reform the Supreme Court, because it's been one of the biggest forces kind of pushing us off the cliff here over the past decade or so. And similar with the filibuster, we got to reform that in order to actually enact legislation that will benefit people and touch upon their day-to-day lives. So at least I guess that is the silver lining here. And the other one that I've seen, and you can probably speak to this a little bit more, is that I know Virginia has been considering doing a redistricting. Now that Texas is moving forward, I would think that would be kind of, another kind of, it would kind of bulwark the pro redistricting case there. But, we had this after the district court decision came down a few weeks ago. There was this notion that was out there, at least for a little while, that maybe the whole redistricting thing was going to backfire on Republicans, that they thought they were going to pick up all of these seats, and then if the Texas one was struck down, suddenly it looked like Democrats might actually come out kind of ahead. I think that's kind of out the window now. But if Virginia redistricts, at least you can kind of limit the damage a little bit.
I don't think Republicans are going to come out particularly ahead here, even with this major setback in Texas. There are some states where it remains to be seen what they wind up doing, Indiana and Florida in particular. But Virginia is very, very compelling. And I'm glad you brought it up, Aaron, because Virginia Democrats are really aggro right now. And this is
Hmm.
only going to add fuel to the fire. Right now, Virginia has 11 congressional districts. And right now, the delegation is quite evenly divided, 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. There is a phrase that you will see circulating on Blue Sky and elsewhere, 10-1, meaning let's draw a map from the perspective of Virginia Democrats. Let's draw a map that has 10 Democratic seats and just 1 Republican seat. And before you raise objections, let me tell you, I have seen hypothetical maps, 10-1 maps. You can absolutely do this. There are
Hmm.
some genius, brilliant map makers out there, many amateurs, folks who aren't necessarily professionally involved in politics. They're on Dave's Redistricting app, which is a phenomenal free tool that anyone can check out. And you can draw any kind of map you want. And these aren't crazy, absurd maps with insane lines or whatever. They look pretty good, if you want to talk about the eye test, which is ridiculous, but winds up being important politically. So it's totally plausible. But here's the thing, Aaron, this is not just some sickos on the internet drawing up 10-1 maps. Virginia Republicans themselves have expressed an interest in doing a 10-1 map. And State Senator Louise Lucas, in particular, if you follow her, she's only on Twitter, unfortunately, not Blue Sky. She's an incredible shit poster, really remarkable, not the sort of person you'd expect. She's a senior citizen, an older Black woman, and she loves to mix it up with the best of the posters. And she has been screaming for 10-1 after the Texas ruling came out. I think she just posted a tweet that was just 10-1. And
Wow.
so there's still quite a few more steps here. Virginia Democrats have to pass their amendment a second time when they reconvene in January. That won't be a problem. And then voters have to approve it in a special election, probably in April. I
Hmm.
think that there will be a lot of momentum behind that vote. We saw just how big the California vote was for Prop 50. So, man, if 10-1 happens, that's a lot of seats. I mean, that's an increase from 6-5. And so, that also really tends to put Republicans on the back foot here. Indiana, we're going to find out next week whether the state Senate winds up standing strong against the demands to gerrymander there. In the Indiana State House, they just had a vote today, Aaron, to advance the map, and they have this 9-0 map, 9 Republican seats, no Democratic seats. It's currently 7-2 Republican. The Indiana House just voted to advance it today, and that was expected. But at least 11 Republicans in the state House voted against it. So I think there's a chance that Indiana doesn't happen. I think there's a chance that Missouri's map, which passed, winds up getting blocked by a veto referendum. So yeah, I still think there's a chance. But the one last thing I want to mention is that there are other Democratic states that can act now and need to move now. Illinois, Oregon, Maryland, they can all redistrict right away for 2026. And then there are other states that can pass constitutional amendments that also need to get moving. New Jersey, New York, and Colorado in particular. So yeah, time to move your asses, Democrats.
Yeah, and there was, which I'm sure most of our viewers are aware of because I'm assuming most people are kind of political junkies, but there was the state senator in Indiana last weekend who came out against redistricting because of Trump's use of the R word slur that he used against Tim Walz. I'm blinking on the guy's name. I think it's like Bokacek or something like that.
Yeah,
In any event,
something like that.
he has a daughter who has Down syndrome, and basically said, Trump should spend his time kind of proving why he should have a congressional majority going forward after next year. And so, it's been because maybe you can explain that to us. Like, I'm a little bit mystified because Indiana is an extremely Republican state, obviously, but there seems to be a lot of hesitance. I mean, even where Trump has had kind of these meltdowns on True Social, threatening specific Republican lawmakers there for not being with the program. So, what's going on there? What's the source of the resistance to redistricting there?
It's an interesting question, and I wish I had a better answer. I really don't. There are, I think, simply a number of Republicans out there who view this push for purely naked partisan purposes as being distasteful and antithetical. And I mean, I'm a little hesitant to attribute them to actually having like pro democracy principles
Yeah.
in their hearts, but maybe they do. There are also, I'm sure, various parochial political reasons. Let's say you're a state legislator and you're already in a congressional district that maybe you have your eye on in a few years when the incumbent plans to retire, and so you like the way that district is set up right now, and you don't want to see that change. There are reasons like that, and also, and this is a perfect segue to talk about the Tennessee special election. The more you gerrymander, the more you put seats at risk. Now, Republicans have generally been very, very careful in their gerrymandering. And they have made sure not to jeopardize any of the seats they currently hold, for instance, with the Texas map, when they go after Democratic seats. However, this is a big however, when Republicans are engaging in this kind of gerrymandering, they typically want a district that is going to be around Trump plus 15 to say Trump plus 25. Well, the district in Tennessee, Tennessee 7th District, the Democrats lost was Trump plus 22. And Republicans freaked out about the possibility that they might lose that seat. They wound up winning it by 9. It was a very bad underperformance for them, but they had to spend millions of dollars to try to protect a seat they never should have had to sweat in the first place. So yeah, maybe Republicans, if they start to keep on gerrymandering more and they create more of these Trump plus 18, 19, 20 seats, maybe they won't fall. But these incumbents, they don't want to have to sweat their reelections. They'd much rather be in a Trump plus 30 seat or 35 seat and not have to worry about it at all. So I do wonder if there is some growing hesitancy in that regard, because Afton Bain, she fell short, but she outperformed by 13 points. So and that's also, by the way, the exact same as the average for Democrats in special elections across the country. We've had 60 special elections this year. Democrats are outperforming them by 13 points. So if you're a Republican map maker, you're like, well, I can't draw a Trump plus 15 district. That's a little too, close for comfort. So we got to draw Trump plus 20. Is that enough? Maybe not. So I think there's all kinds of reasons for hesitancy, but we'll never really know.
Yeah, and one other, and I know this was part of your coverage of Tennessee 7, but the turnout was basically, 'cause, a lot of times the turnout for these specials is much
Yep.
lower, and so it's difficult to kind of model that forward because the turnout is higher in a midterm context or a presidential context, and then you have a different electorate, so it's apples and oranges. But the turnout was, the comparisons I saw. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I saw a lot of comparisons that it was pretty much on par with 2022. Not so
Yes.
much last year. I'm assuming last year was even higher turnout than 2022, but that was, it was a confounding in terms of, the Republicans who want to say this isn't what the electorate's going to look like next year will be okay. Well, if turnout remains that high, then maybe this is kind of more indicative of what will happen next year. And again, you can't really do this, but if you kind of project that result onto the country, and let's say it's a D plus 10 instead of 13 as it was in 7, then all of a sudden, like you were saying, some of these seats that Republicans think are going to be safe maybe aren't safe. And so that's the other thing, is that they can kind of gerrymander all they want or try to redistrict and do this kind of arms race. And I saw DeSantis was doing the TV rounds today. It sounds like he's serious, about trying to get that done in Florida. But if we're looking at a situation where the generic ballot is like D plus 8 in the House next year, it's kind of, it's the, we talk about the blue wave. I mean, the metaphor is kind of apt, because like the level is so high that it just kind of washes away
Yeah.
some of these gerrymandered districts. So that is kind of, something that could happen. And, connecting up with the earlier discussion of the economy, like I don't really see a lot of reasons for hope for Republicans that like next year is going to be a great environment for them. Now, a lot of crazy stuff could happen over the next 10, 11 months. In terms of like, we're kind of unpacking the elections last month, or even what happened in Tennessee. And if conditions kind of remain the same, but like, who knows what the country's going to look like in 10 months. So I do want to kind of at least introduce that note of caution that we can't totally foresee the future in that way, but it does seem like it's going to be a really negative environment for Republicans. And I did want to ask you this, which is kind of related to this conversation. Although if you have other things to say about Tennessee, that's great too. But there was a lot of reporting this week. I saw more on like the level of kind of like rumor mongering of like House Republican retirements,
Yeah.
which you would expect, when it's going to be a bad environment for them. People don't want to, if you're in the majority, you don't want to be in the minority. That's not as much fun. Then there was like kind of the weird reporting surrounding Mike Johnson, that, Nancy Mace, and it seems like some of the women House Republicans aren't really fans of his. But um, how much do you think that's a real thing? Do you think we're going to see like a wave of House Republican retirements? And that would seem to be really hurtful for Republicans too, because then you're losing the advantage of incumbency. So I mean, I guess I'm just curious what your ears to the ground a little more than mine is with that. Is that a real thing? And do you think we're going to see a wave of retirements here in the next couple months?
So let's put a pin in that for 1 second, because you
Sure.
also asked about turnout.
Mhm.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a hugely important point. Now, as I always say, you never want to draw too many conclusions from just a single data point, a single election. But turnout was insane in Tennessee 7th District. And, we have a midterm coming up, so that's why you want to look back to 2022. Turnout in presidential years is always very, very high, and it's not a useful guide for what's going to happen in midterms when turnout is lower. But in special elections, as you were saying, turnout tends to be very low. That was not the case in Tennessee, despite the fact that this was happening on a weird December Tuesday immediately after the Thanksgiving holiday. In 2022, the total turnout, in other words, just the total number of votes, if you add up all the votes for all the candidates, was 180,000. On Tuesday, it was 179,000. So essentially identical. And yeah, you're exactly right that if Democrats are doing D plus 13 in a high turnout environment that potentially mirrors or anticipates what the 2026 electorate will look like, that is seriously, seriously worrying for Republicans. And Republicans know it, because Aaron, I've been following special elections for a very long time, and I remember so well the reaction when John Ossoff lost the Georgia 6th special election back in 2017. It was a close race in ancestrally Republican territory, and everyone just was mocking him. The Republicans, the media, even some Democrats were like, "Oh, spend $1 zillion, you lost this race. What good is this moral victory?" Well, they were completely wrong, because it turned out to presage what was a massive 2018 at the ballot box for Democrats when they flipped 40 House seats. This time, the coverage has been completely different. The reaction has been completely different. Republicans were really panicked. I kind of would have expected them to say, "Oh, we won by 9 points. It's a victory. Democrats can talk about their moral victories all they want." They didn't. The media coverage, even the AP was like, this is a really bad result for Republicans. So they are definitely panicked. And to your point about the economy in particular, look, we can't know whether things are going to get worse, better, or stay about the same. But I think odds are things are going to get worse in terms of
Yeah.
the economy and the political mood for Republicans. So D13 might be, we could be going up from there. The other half of things, the unhappiness in the House. I mean, there was this big New York Times report about women in the House in particular. Stefanik, you mentioned Mace, also Luna, and some others as well, just being bitterly unhappy with Mike Johnson. And Stefanik, who was a top member of leadership less than a year ago, openly savaging Mike Johnson in the press. It's really, really amazing. And I think Josh Marshall summed it up really well. He said, if you're facing adversity, if you're facing an emergency and a danger, you and the people you're facing it with, come together to try to fight back. But if you're on a sinking ship, there's nothing for you to do except throw a punch. Of course, he meant it metaphorically. And you're on a sinking ship. It was kind of funny. He said, like, you grab the person next to you and you either kiss them full on the mouth or sock them in the face. And that's what's happening right now. House Republicans know they are on a sinking ship. They know there's virtually no chance, no matter how much gerrymandering they engage in, of saving their majority next year. It's also possible that even the Senate is in play. And so you saw this reporting that I want to say it was probably too good to be true. Do not get your hopes up on this, that Republicans could not just start retiring en masse, but that there could be enough GOP resignations, in other words, leaving Congress early before the end of this Congress, such that Democrats could actually take a majority before 2027. Now, I think that's fantastical. It's like the kind of conversation where, like, political reporters love to have. Look, I enjoy it too, but it's a little bit like, oh, what if there's a contested presidential convention? And they talk about that every 4 years and it never happens. But I do think retirements, like normal retirements at the end of the cycle, not running for reelection, I do think that we are likely to see more from Republicans. We've already seen quite a few.
Yeah, I just wish that with some of this reporting, we actually knew what was really happening because the cover story about the Stefanik Johnson thing is like it's so arcane. I mean, Stefanik, she was mad over it, something in like the defense appropriations bill where she wanted Congress to be notified if there's a counterintelligence investigation open into like a presidential candidate, which it's this thing to basically make Trump happy. It seems like.
Right.
I don't really believe that that's what's going on there
No.
because she seems to have like gone to war with him, slagging him in the press, and so to me, I mean, there's got to be more to it than that. But it's hard for me to get into it as like something that I'm interested in when it's like this weird kind of Trumpy performative, like let's please the dear leader thing. So maybe at some point we'll learn more about that. I mean, I could certainly see Mike Johnson not being the smoothest operator with women, just given like his character and what he professes to believe in. So maybe that's more of it, just that he's rubbing people the wrong way. I mean, certainly seems, with maybe the exception of like Lisa McClain, that he doesn't really have great relationships with a lot of House women. I mean, Stefanik used to be the third ranking House member, right?
Yep.
Before her ill-fated UN ambassador appointment, which never happened because, of course, the House even back then, early this year, with the margins were too thin for her to leave, at least in Trump's mind. So. That is interesting, and that maybe strikes me as like when the gavel switches, we'll get kind of the deeply reported, probably a lot of anonymous sources, maybe some on record ones, kind of dishing on Mike Johnson, but his lies are becoming even more and more outrageous. He was on Fox Business today claiming that this Congress has been one of the most productive in history,
Yeah.
and it's just like
he literally sent it home for 2 months.
Yeah, but it's like upside down world where. It's like a cold open. I mean, it really is like an SNL cold open watching him on Fox these days. But so anyway, so I look forward to those pieces. Either when the retirements really start en masse, or probably more likely when after the election, when members feel like they can speak a little more candidly about what's going on there. But it does seem like there's a lot of unhappiness among House Republicans.
Yeah, I'll leave with just one last thought. So, after Stefanik's nomination was withdrawn, she had even gone on a farewell tour of her district. And she had to like humiliatingly return to Congress. I think even like she had given up her office and like got some smaller office or something. And that was a very awkward dance with Mike Johnson in that regard, because she had given up all her posts. She gave up her leadership posts, committees, etc. And there was a quote just the other day in regard to all of this, where some staffer for Mike Johnson or someone close to Mike Johnson said something along the lines of, like Stefanik should be more grateful. After she came back, we gave her a fake job with a fake title. Why,
Wow.
why isn't she thrilled about that? Yeah, I know it was, and I
Yeah.
was like, you know, I was so glad to see that, because when all this was unfolding earlier this year, and they're like, oh, she's going to be the special assistant to the, regional manager or whatever bullshit title they gave her. I was like, oh, that is such a bullshit title. There's no real responsibility here. They didn't actually carve out some new extra leadership role for her. But like, that's just my personal belief.
Yeah.
There was no reporting substantiating that. I wasn't going to just go off half cocked. And then to see this, staffer say, "Oh yeah, this was just a total fraud." I was like, "Oh, very, very validating." So,
Yeah.
I hope Stefanik enjoyed seeing that in print.
Yeah, and, the other thing which we didn't even have time to get into is that was notable from Johnson's media rounds today is that they basically have given up on the ACA subsidies in terms of extending them. I mean, it just seems like people's premiums are going to spike, which is obviously bad news for millions of Americans. But politically, because we just had this shutdown fight where the public blamed Republicans and the fight was over healthcare. That's another data point. I mean, we talked about the economy, we talked about just kind of like the political environment broadly, but like, if people's health, that's part of the affordability thing too, obviously. Like, it's a core good, health insurance. And if your price goes up by 200, 300% and you're
Yeah,
blaming
right.
Republicans, and, that very much seemed like a self-inflicted wound where, it wouldn't have really been, it wouldn't be very easy for them just to extend that. Democrats would have been up for that. But that's another thing as we head into the holidays, the new year, that I think will really hurt Republicans.
Absolutely. Well, that is a good note to end on, even if the news of increasing subsidies is really pretty terrifying and horrible. But we will, of course, be following that closely and the political impacts. Thank you, everyone. We had 1,000 people tune in. Totally awesome. Thank you for watching Near and Rupar. We go live 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central every Friday afternoon. If you have not yet subscribed to Public Notice, Aaron's site, I strongly urge you to do so. That's publicnotice.co, or find it in the Substack app. The Down Ballot is the-downballot.com, also in the Substack app. If you haven't subscribed to us, please subscribe as well. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you all for backing me up on Balloon Boy. And we
Maybe I'll have
will
to make that the clip. I might have to make the Balloon Boy thing the clip.
Balloon
We
Boy.
didn't even have, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of good stuff in the down ballot. I really, you're reporting this week on the Daryl Issa situation,
Oh,
which if we ran out of stuff to talk about, I was going to ask you about that. But this kind of
too
flirtation
fun.
with running in Texas. I mean, I was going to ask you like that. I can't believe that's even like allowed, but I put it. Maybe
Just
we'll circle back
barely.
on that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you missed that one, California Republican Daryl Issa got utterly screwed by Prop 50, the new map there. We talked about maybe running for a seat in East Texas. Totally, totally bonkers stuff. Check it out at the Down Ballot, though.
Yeah.
Very fun story. And thank you, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye bye.